Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of the RPA podcast, The Player's Voice. I'm your host, Ethan Waller, and this month's episode is actually pretty timely for me personally, as I'm currently recovering from a shoulder operation. Cue tiny violin. We're going to be talking about coping with injuries and the impact that it can have on you throughout your career. And I'm fortunate to be joined today by two former teammates. We have Matt Garvey, who's currently RPA Development Manager and at Bath Rugby, and Niall Annett, who is also playing hooker down at Bath Rugby. So, hello, men. How are we? Niall, we've been speaking a little bit just before this podcast started. You've embraced the sun over the last few days.
Yeah, what about the UK having a heat wave just as pre-season starts? It's tough, but I'm the best colour of red, anyway. Normally, like December, fairly red. So when you bring out the 30-degree heat for pre-season day one yesterday, I was in hell. But no, it's nice. Everyone seems to be in good form, and it's nice to be on here with you fellas, and nice to get a catch up. So thank you for having me.
Pleasure to see you. And Gavs, how are you, mate? How's things? I know you were there watching the boys in hell over the last 2 days. Now said that you've been doing an admirable amount of work over the last day or so.
Yeah, really good. Thank you, pal. Yeah, it's actually nice. I think it's Sunday night was quite actually relaxing. I think the last 13 or so years when you dread that pre-season weighing or the body fat, it was quite nice to walk in and see Niall sweating by the scales. So it was, it's quite a nice relief just to sit back and watch the boys bake in the afternoon sun.
I was going to say, you've been retired for a year now, and obviously you've transitioned to your role at the RPA, which is one that we've spoke about on previous podcasts and how important it is. How have you found that transition, moving away from the fitness, on the field and being able to sit on the side with a nice iced coffee and watch the boys in hell? How's that been for you?
Really easy, surprisingly. I get to keep that interaction with the players, which is something I think when I was going to retire, I was going to miss. Speaking to the lads on a daily basis, being forced in that environment. But surprisingly, I don't miss any of the playing or the training. The pre-season at the moment is kind of, brilliant. I'm glad I retired a long time ago. So it's nice. But to speak to the players and people like you guys who I played with and alongside, it's nice to see on a daily basis. So it's a really good role. I just hope to pass on my experience and of what to avoid and what to do, really.
You spoke pretty candidly. We did a series on social media with Sean Rompson about the transition and about the next stage. And I mean, like you say, you found that you're fortunate that in this role you can still have that relationship with players. But was this always the plan to go into this space, or was it something that you sort of the opportunity came up and you jumped at?
No, it was. I guess. I mean, this role is there's only a few fortunate people that get to do it. I was coming to the end of my career and had a few injuries, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And then kind of just had that realization that I hadn't really prepared for life after rugby. So I used the next couple of years to try and sort my future out. And I was looking at a few different options, but it was going to be around the idea of wanting to help players out, wanting to pass on the experience. I felt that as a player, I'd kind of covered every aspect. I've been an academy player, I've been a senior player, I've been a club captain, I've been injured, I've moved clubs, I had contracts taken away, I've been paid very generously. But I just wanted to pass on that experience. And when this role came available, it was an opportunity that I had to jump at. And hopefully Niall will back me up and say I'm doing a very good job at it.
Well, we'll come to that. Niall, mate, how's your summer been? This off-season, like you say, you're back in this week, but it's been a pretty eventful off-season for you. You enjoyed it?
Pretty much so. It's our first off-season with our daughter's just about to turn 20 months, so it's the first off-season we've had where she's like a functioning little person, and she certainly determines a lot more of your time, and that's been a really enjoyable thing, but it's not kind of as easy to travel and get about. She's been in nursery, so traveling's not been as easy. They don't tell you that you pay for that up front. That's always something that it's in the small print.
They'll get you.
It does get you, because then you're effectively paying for whether they're there or not. But we've had a really good one. We're at that age as well where your off season's full of weddings, stags, and we had an absolutely fantastic 5 weeks with a couple of those, and we got home to see some family, which is always nice, being away from them so much. And I think by the time it came round yesterday for day one to start, I was actually ready to get back into the routine and the structure of it. Pre-season's always going to be tough and challenging, but I think this is number 14, and there's nothing that they can throw at you that you haven't really seen before. So back to the routine was certainly welcomed, and just glad to be back in now.
And I mean, we'll continue going back in time. Obviously, the off season there, enjoyed yourself after a pretty eventful first season at Bath as well. Some massive highs, some pretty big lows as well. But how have you found that first year there after being at Worcester for so long?
Yeah, I needed it. I absolutely loved my time at Worcester. The 8 years there, met some of the best people I'd meet, and then unfortunately Garvey too. But I think throughout the 8 years, I had my own highs and lows there. But I just got to the point where I think that fresh challenge, that fresh stimulus was something I just needed. It was then or never. Everything that's happened and transpired after that is so desperately unfortunate and sad. And, we didn't know that was going to go the way things were. But for me personally and individually and from a competitive nature, I just needed that kick and I needed that challenge. And the move to Bath certainly being an enjoyable one. Like you said, it didn't start particularly well, with a few indiscretions, but we found a rhythm towards the mid part of the season, and the team itself, we could feel that we were getting better and progressing, even though a lot of people maybe couldn't see it or feel it, we could. And I think towards the end of the season, we showed a little bit more about what we're about and that we're heading in the right direction. So it's an exciting pre-season for us this year because we get to kind of kick off from where we left off. We'll have a lot of guys away with international duties, but it's going to be a season where we need to kick on and we need to get better. And I'm certainly really enjoying being down here.
Brilliant. Well, that was very positive. I like it. Nice positive spin on things. And now this conversation is going to get slightly less positive as we talk about some of the darker stuff in rugby and what this podcast is really about, which is injuries. And out of the three of us, I don't think any of us are really strangers to those big injuries. And they've been present throughout all of our careers. But I suppose, Gavs, I'll start with you. Because Niall, I know that your injury list is something that I specifically want to get to and talk about. But Gavs, what were your earliest memories of a big injury when you were younger? What was your history like in terms of that?
I mean, I came to rugby quite late. I played football until I got 17. So
what?
Everything was about. Yeah, I know.
I've seen you play football.
Yeah, exactly that.
You used to have centre back for Chelsea, wasn't it?
People think I was Fabian Barthez in goal at one point, but yeah, too tall. But so all my previous injuries were like kicks to the shin and stuff like that. When I started playing rugby and picked off, that's when the collision started taking effect. And my first real injury was at Irish when I was just breaking into the team and we played Munster away and I got quite a serious neck injury. Didn't realise it until the next morning, kind of away in, I think it was at Toman Park. Had a few glasses afterwards, but ended up being like a rush back, two operations split over 4 weeks, resulting in a titanium disc in my neck, which was pretty severe. But again, it all happened so fast. It was kind of just when you return to the club and you realise that you're just on that momentum, kind of going from a youngster into a starting team for a Champions Cup to you've almost fallen off the ride and you're back at the bottom level again, which was pretty tough. But it was getting injured then compared to getting injured now was kind of different. It's kind of quite old school. And you kind of just had to crack on with it really. You didn't really know what to do. You had your physio, you had your rehab, and you just didn't really moan because you were young and you kind of cracked on with it, which was part of why I thought it was important that we talk about the injuries part was because of how different it was then to probably what we were used to what players are now. But yeah, that was probably my first one. Which was pretty horrific in terms of the sensation going from my neck down to my hands and bits like that. But yeah, it wasn't the easiest at times. But that compared to being injured 10 years later, you'd handle it completely different, if that makes sense.
So how expand on that for me a little bit? So how did you handle it back then? I know, like you say, it was very much more of a culture of sit down, crack on, get it done.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I had 7 operations when I played, and that was my first one. And back then, you just kind of, I guess there wasn't too much sports psychology back then. That was kind of new to rugby. And you kind of had your treatment, you did your rehab, and you just cracked on with it. And it was kind of you just followed what the other injured boys did, I guess. And nowadays, I mean, I remember he was my last year at Bath. It was me and Henry Thomas, and we were probably, I don't know, on our 5th or 6th operation at the time, both just sapping in the gym, having a laugh, knew how to handle it, used it as an opportunity just to, I don't know, be proactive for their upper body, rest their lower body, whatever it was, just kind of moan, sap, have a coffee, laugh at the other lads. And that was how we survived. But there was a young hooker and he was injured with us. It was his first injury. And he kind of said to us walking back one day, he was like, how do you cope with injuries? And we both just turned to him, laughed and just said, just crack on. And we walked off. And it wasn't until about half an hour later I turned to Henry and I thought, mate, that's probably not the right thing to have said. We're from a different generation where you did just do that. But now players are asking for a bit more support, a bit more help. And how do we do that? How do we offer? Who can offer support? And how do we rally around each other and support our teammates in some of the darkest times in their career, I guess?
I think it's interesting because I've been pretty fortunate in that every group that I've been involved in, whenever there's been someone who's had a long-term injury, it's been a very good environment. The first thing that's said when there's an injury is, make sure you get round him. People are constantly looking to make sure you're still a part of the family and you're still a part of the socials, the interaction, because it can be a lonely place when everyone else is out in the training field. You're not necessarily going to meetings. You're sat in the gym by yourself. You're coming in and doing physio at pretty unsociable hours. It's a hugely difficult thing to manage. And I mean, would you say that now towards the end of your career was a lot better from that point of view, from a inclusivity point of view?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when you're younger, you kind of just go with the flow, I guess. Well, I certainly did. And like you touched upon it then, that your schedule isn't the most kind of effective way of being inclusive. You're the boys that are fit are in the gym and you're in the physio bed. And then they go out onto the pitch, then you go into the gym. And then they're showering and you might be doing, I don't know, an exercise somewhere else, or you never really cross over. So you might see each other for 10 minutes at lunch and at the end of the day. But I guess when you're a bit more experienced or you've spoken to the right people, you've got the right support, you can almost tailor make your sessions or yourself to be more around the players. Can I do my rehab next to the pitch, or I can watch the boys train, or I can do some my stretching sessions there. Or so you want to be around the lads, you want to be involved, because you can be quite guilty of it yourself of just falling into the trap of being isolated. When you're together, when you're playing, or you're in the 23, or you're in the fit 40 that are training together, it's easy to kind of take yourself out of it and feel a victim. But it's really important. I felt, Niall, you might agree that you keep yourself involved, whether it's with the analysis or in the review groups or the preview groups that you're helping towards the team, just to try and stay involved any way you can.
Yeah, I mean, just touching on that, I think you're absolutely spot on, Garvey. I feel like it's a term I've used before, and I don't use it in a sensationalized sort of manner, but there's like a grieving process when you get those kind of long-term significant injuries. And I think players need to be allowed to have those. Some of the best environments I've seen, they're encouraged to get away before major operations, or they have a major operation and they fit in that time away from the club, because what ends up happening is you're dissociated from all the normality that you used to. So, being in the change room before pitch session, there's music on, Garvey's in the middle, tripping at people. You might even be in between sessions, there's a game of like in a change room, there's a game of cricket going on or whatever it is, and you basically find, like Garvey said, I couldn't have put it better, you basically ghost around the training facility, and you miss everything, and that's just the nature of it, because the trainers and the physios are trying to fit everybody in. They're trying to make sure when you're in there, it's concerted training to make yourself better. But I feel like in the best environments, they have this ability to keep those players who are separated, integrated in some forms. And Garvey, you touched on it. We've seen it before where long-term injured players, they get involved in social committees. Granted, they're not going to be leading the charge at socials, maybe in the infancy of their rehab, but towards the end of that, there's no reason why they can't be organising meals out, or they can't be organising beers at a pub or whatever it is, or being involved if they are interested in rugby. And you're going to have contradicting personalities. There's some people who get injured and they go, okay, no rugby, that's me, thank you, and that has to be respected. And then there'll be people who are quite involved in it. It helps their process of healing mentally and physically. So I think, as professional rugby's changed in my time personally, coming from Ireland to England, I feel like rugby clubs have got there's a massive onus on them to look after these players. We know we're commodities to some degree. We understand that we're here to do a job. if we don't perform well or we're injured, there's probably another piece of meat somewhere who's going to come in and do that job instead of us. And rugby clubs have there's a massive onus on them to not just treat you like that commodity when you're at your lowest, which is normally when you're injured. They have to look after, respect and care for the people. So I think there should be rules within rugby clubs. I was lucky, and I'm sure we'll get to it, Beef, but I had an injury physio, and an injury F&C coach who literally just worked with injured players during my time of long-term injury. And I find like that was a really important role. But you see with the budgets being reduced, are those rules going? Is that something that really is a strength and conditioning coach doubling up now and doing the first team fit available players and also the injured players? And do they get the service and treatment they need? That concerns me. So I think rugby clubs have a bit of a due diligence to make sure those injured players are looked after when they're honestly they're at their worst, they're at their lowest. So it's an interesting conversation.
I think it's a huge point. We had Rob Shotton on here a couple of episodes ago from Looseheads, and we were talking about that mental fitness and how do you rate yourself 1 out of 10 mentally every single day. And I think that's necessarily an aspect that's overlooked as well. But no, I think you've hit the nail on the head there hugely. That still being as though you're a valued member of the team when you're at your lowest is something that will hugely give you that motivation going through. And I think it brilliantly brings us on to your injury story, really. And this is a pretty isolated one, obviously, from my experience with you. But when I joined Worcester, you were coming back from an injury and then had a pretty torrid time of it. But I'll let you tell the story. Can you just walk us through that 18 months of yours?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's not abnormal. It happens. People have cluster injuries, and unfortunately, I did a syndesmosis in a match against Northampton, actually against UBC. Just the traditional rugby mechanism injury, not you. It probably would have gone even worse if you'd landed on me, but
only if you were playing the last 10 minutes, mate.
so we just a traditional rugby injury. These things happen. And syndesmosis back, and I was back within about 10, 12 weeks. It was a really smooth rehab. And I got back playing, and then I had a vestibular concussion in my ear where my balance was really distorted, and I struggled massively with the whole thing around concussion. So rare and very difficult, and they were really careful with me, and we took our time coming back because anyone who actually does know me, like, I can be a bit of an overthinker, and this was a concern for me, So we took our time from that. I came back. I was feeling fit, healthy. That turned around for pre-season. I got excited in pre-season. I went and I tried to do some touch games with some of the staff, and I had a significant hamstring tendon tear, which I've never been so sketchy in my life. Like, the analysts and everyone there were like, "You can't tell them you were playing with us. Like, we're in so much trouble." And that took time. That was like another 8 in that 10 months, and then 8 to 10 weeks. Sorry, and then I don't know where. The biggest of all, like, I saved it for last. It was like an ACL in training, completely. No one really near me. Me and GJ resting on a pad. I just put my foot down and I felt the click. So before you know it, there's 18 months of a rugby career spent effectively in and out. When I say in, it was like I was back for a week to maximum 2 weeks, and I basically yo-yoed around for about 18 months with these injuries. And I felt at times throughout that so unbelievably isolated. I felt like my worth as a rugby player was at its lowest simply because I couldn't contribute. And that's why I mentioned that the club's onus on encouraging these people to feel valued. And that's not easy because they're dealing with baggage. And I use that term grieving, not to be, like I said, sensationalize it. But I had some massive, massive struggles throughout that period. And I think what you learn from getting through that is some real brilliant resilience. But at the time, basically, like, honestly, it was tough.
Well, I remember coming in, and I think it's interesting that you say that you felt so isolated, because from a fresh, a bit of fresh meat coming in, essentially, you were a massive part of that environment. Even with the injuries, like, you could tell there was no one who didn't know you. All the new lads that had come in were very friendly with you, and you were a constant presence around the place. And maybe, like you say, that's down to having that specific physio, that specific S&C, so you weren't necessarily isolated all the time. But even from my perspective, it doesn't seem it. But from yours, who was, a relatively outgoing guy, it still felt isolated. So there must be some players who aren't necessarily as outgoing as yourself or as involved, who must really find times like that difficult. I mean, what were your best coping strategies throughout that 18 months?
so funny, there'll be things that, I've talked about before, but like, unless you've heard me talk about it, you wouldn't believe it. Like, I had an amazing girlfriend who became my fiance throughout that period, who was a massive leaning point for me. And then we had a small dog called Benji. He was like a Schnauzer Poodle cross. I had this dream of having a big Alsatian and eating beef, but our allergies stopped that straight away. But if I told you that my partner and my dog like carried me through periods of that, particularly the ACL, I was dealing with some off-field stuff around my old man being like seriously ill and eventually passing away. I remember him passing away. It would have been just before I had my ACL surgery. So you're dealing with all these things external. I was so lucky that I had Gareth and Reese as my physio and trainer, and they basically sheltered me, looked after me. They gave me strategies that would work for me personally. I remember having this checklist that it was something as stupid as like an ACL recovery. People will tell you I had like a double leg bodyweight squat. I had running in the pool. I had all these micro box ticking exercises that I had to get through. But every day I could come in and I could pick something or I could work towards something. And that was a massive coping mechanism for me with my personality. But I think largely, my friends, like you would have been at that stage, Beef and a few other guys, and my partner and dog just carried me there was periods where I'd come in and I'd look at the two trainers and I'd be like, someone like me, like I'm open, like I love my job. I really do. Like there's very few days I come in and I'm not motivated, but there was days I came in through that period and I was like, I just don't have it today. And they'd be like, okay, well, we'll adjust this slightly, or we'll do this today and we'll do that tomorrow. And they would find ways to carry me. And I think that's the thing, there's days you come in and you're like an 8 out of 10 and you're like, okay, I actually feel like I'm headed the right direction. And then you'll have a small setback with the injury, or a coach will walk past you and not say hello to you or forget your name or whatever it is. And you'll be like, okay, now I'm a 3 out of 10. And you need to rely on people through those periods. That's whenever the term community within a rugby club really rings true. And if it's a proper community, people will get looked after. But unfortunately, I've seen, too many people not, and too many people just left to be isolated.
Yeah, and that mental health aspect side of things, it's something that, in some aspects of every podcast we've had so far this year, we've come back to it because it's becoming such a massive thing, quite rightly, in the sport. But I don't think it's ever more prevalent than when we're talking about injuries. This, as you said, that journey's never linear. It's never just a straight upward curve of things going well. One day you'll get DOMSy, maybe you'll twin something again, and it sets you back a week or two. I remember coming back from my shoulder operation the year after, and my first game back fit, I've done my hip pointer. I'm out for another 3-4 weeks, and then you suddenly lose your opportunity to get back in, and it's a constant battle. But it's how do we include those people who won't go out themselves, those introverted players, which there are a lot of. How do we get through to them?
Yeah. Sorry, but if I don't mean to interrupt, and this is something I feel passionately about. I believe in this day and age, especially, you look at the generations of people that you see come through the game. Kids nowadays are different to how we were. I'm not labeling myself quite as old as you, but they're different and they need different management. So I think the progression for coaches nowadays, like really good modern coaches, have the ability to do strong man management with those people, even though they're not throwing a line out, catching them all, catching a line out, sacking them all, making tackles, goal kick, even though they're not doing direct correlated results to on Saturday or Sunday, they have the ability to find the moments to have good management over particularly those injured players. So the coaches have to be able to show that sort of skill nowadays, or else what you're left with is just very, very sad people in difficult positions.
And I think both of you hit this point slightly when you've said it, but I guess during those periods of those injuries and especially the more severe ones, at any stage was there a loss of identity for you? I mean, I feel like I probably know the answer to this, but how do you cope with that loss of identity? You are the rugby player, you are the person who's meant to be going out there, like you say, throwing a line out, sacking them all, and suddenly you're resound to the gym in the physio bed. How do you cope with that sort of that loss of who you are? Is it off field, or is it like you say, no, your specific one was that checklist and getting through that? Garbs, I'll go back to you, mate.
Yeah, no, I think it's certainly tough because we've all kind of touched on it. Rugby's such a bubble, you get caught up in it. Because it's such a short turnaround, every week you get like Monday to Saturday, and then you go again, and you go Monday to Saturday, and you kind of get caught up in it, and you lose perspective of what is kind of the real world, should we say, civilian life. And all of a sudden that gets taken away from you, and you're put back. Your goal setting is no longer, do we win on Saturday? It's now what's 4 weeks away, 6 weeks away, and you are no longer the rugby player. You're the rehabber, and that could be 12 weeks, it could be 6 months, it could be 9 months, depending on what it is. 18 months, as on and off, as Niall touched upon, and it's tough. I mean, I had one. I mean, I came to Bath and had a really good first year. Did my ankle ligaments, did 3 months of rehab. Came back 2 minutes in my first preseason game, didn't have the op, and then 2 minutes to the first preseason game, boom, ankle went again. Boom, right, operation this time, another 4 months. So it's that repetition, and you come back, and it's kind of like 7 months since you last played. Your position's now been cemented by another player. At that time, I think it happened to be Bath just signed some guy from the other side of the world, I think called Sam Burgess. I don't know if you've heard of him. Quite a big name, big superstar, who was now talking about going from 12 to 6, where I was playing. And all of a sudden, you're not the number 6 everyone talks about. Someone else is talking about that shirt, and it's kind of like, what do I do now? And much like Niall, like I had my other half at the time, who was, the rock, the support I always go home to. But then I started taking my frustrations from the club home to home life, and not in a bad way, but I'd be miserable, or I'd be sulking. I wouldn't be able to switch off. And then I guess it was the turning point for me was I went and saw a mind coach, Don McPherson in Bath, and I was a real skeptic. I was kind of like, I've never used the sports psychology before. This is not really for me. As skeptical as you can be. Like when you see a hypnotist on TV, you're like, that won't happen to me, sort of thing. I was like, what have I got to lose? And I went and saw him, and it was kind of like, wow, light bulb moment. He put things into perspective. What was important to me? What wasn't important? How do we get back? And I watched him for years, and then we moved on with Bath. We moved on to a different sports psychologist, Katie Warner, who was amazing. But it wasn't because of that instant chat that I had with Don that opened up my eyes to how I should be looked after. We look after our bodies so much in rugby. We do our stretching, we do our prehab, you do your warm ups, your cool downs. But I guess your head is another part of it, is about how do you maintain who you are when you're not playing rugby. Are you the father? Are you the brother? Are you the son? Are you a teammate? Are you, a support network for your other half? There's much more to it than just being a rugby player, and are people aware of that? Sometimes it takes a serious injury for you to realise that, when actually, your best teammate might be injured and he might need you to be his support pillar. But until that moment happens to you, I don't think we realise that quick enough. And we talk about generation thing. I think it was Niall just said about it, is that we're finding out now is that there's coaches now are players of that generation. You got Simonson at Sal, Wiggy at Leicester, Skibbs at Gloucester. They are players that came from that generation. That there's almost a two-pronged approach. One, we need to learn how to deal with injuries, but others need to learn how to cope with injuries, cope with players that are injured. That makes sense, teammates. And how do we support others that we weren't necessarily supported as, if that makes sense.
No, I think you've articulated that really well. And I've always found, I mean, just my 2 cents in it as well. I'm fortunate that my biggest injuries have normally been elective. So it's been elective to get my shoulders up to the end of season, and the hanging gammy little toe that definitely wasn't gout, it was turf toe. Too much red wine and cheese, it'll get you. No one's safe. So mine, I've always managed to be in a relatively good headspace around it, which I'm extremely fortunate with. But even so, you're not immune to going through pretty tough spots with it. But I think the biggest thing for me was always having something else to focus on in one way or another. When I did my toe, it was I was doing a maths degree at uni. When I did my shoulder the first time, but as you can see, I couldn't finish it.
Surprises
doing
me.
It. Correct, relatively. When I did my first shoulder, I was starting up a pizza business. So I was spending my time, when I had mobility in my arm, doing up a trailer with Niall. Actually, he helped me with a lot of the manual labour when I couldn't do it. And this time around, I've got a few other business interests that I'm putting a lot of time into. So for me, having that external something has always, I mean, throughout the seasons, I've always felt it's made me a better rugby player because it's not made my identity as just Ethan, the rugby player. But it's also something else to focus on when those dark periods come, and it doesn't become all encompassing. It gives you a release. It gives you an out from rugby. So it's not what you're thinking about all the time because it's so hard to step out of.
I completely agree, Beef. I think like if I reflect on it all and listen to you guys, like the main concerns when you get injured, am I going to get back playing? Will I be the same player? Am I going to get a contract? These are the things that go through players' heads, you know, especially when you have, Garvey, like you said, those long-term periods out where you're like, there's doubt even within you, you know, even if it's 2%, it's 2% that you didn't have before when you felt bulletproof and you were playing every week. So how do we eliminate that? I am a big believer that rugby players are their best or at their best when rugby is not just 100%. And that's coming from someone, Beefy, who I know you'll, like, I'm fanatical about it. Like, I love my job, as I mentioned. You know, the game's given me a huge amount and I'm very passionate about it, but it still can't just be Niall, the rugby player, or Beefy, the rugby player, or Garvey, the rugby player. It has to be, how are you developing yourself away from that? And, you know, university is or isn't for everybody. Degrees is or, but like I've seen guys get injured and go and do Sparky, go and become like level 1 Sparky, level 2 Sparky, anything like that you feel like you're developing your life away from rugby for that transition that we all eventually have to make. I personally believe makes you a better rugby player because the shackles come off. You know, if we can get to the point where eventually you take hands of the game and you say, okay, this is the time. The market's never been more flooded for obvious reasons. There's a lot of rugby players out there, bloody good rugby players. And if the time comes and that's it, you know, the transition and the anxiety that you have about moving into the real world, as we call it in inverted commas, you know, I believe that makes you play better rugby. And the things that you've done, Beef, with your time, you got to try and get people to be proactive and find the best in a rubbish scenario. And that's the advice that I give any of the young boys. I'm not saying to them like, oh, you have to do degrees, you have to do this. Just find like what do you enjoy doing? Do you enjoy doing landscaping? Okay, well maybe there's someone somewhere that you can do a little bit of learning through that. You could, as you physically develop and start to feel better, you can start to do a little bit. House projects are always a big one with rugby players because we all think we're properly moguls. You know, there's stuff out there for you to develop and become more rounded. I believe it helps your recovery. I believe it helps your mind. The anxiety around like what does Niall or Garvey or Beefy, the non-rugby player, look like, and it helps your performance. So it's a massive point, Beef, and something I think that people just need to be braver with. It's about having the bravery to be like, okay, this is going to end at some point. What am I doing with my time?
Yeah, completely agree with you. And I guess we're nearing the end here, so I'll round us off by, and I suppose now you've more or less covered it there, but from each of you, if you were to give your younger self a piece of advice at the start of these big long-term injuries, nutshell it for me, what would it be? Gavs?
I mean, without being too long-winded, I mean, I was probably the opposite to you two. I wasn't proactive outside of rugby at all. And sitting here now, I'm preaching that you should be, and I wish I had. You know, I had that. I told you before that I had an injury in my career where I thought it was game over. I was told at one point it could be a game over. But Niall mentioned it then. You know, doing things alongside rugby is, for me, what every player should be doing. It gives you an identity away from the game. If the game's taken away from you or permanently or temporarily, it gives you focus, and it also gives you peace of mind that when rugby does come to the end, because it comes to the end for everyone, it's just a question of when, is your life sorted afterwards? Because if your life's sorted away from the game, you can be more relaxed and you can focus on the weekend. You can focus on the Saturday and the following game. And, you know, you can focus on being the rugby player for that short period of time. But if you can focus on your life away from rugby as much as you can as well, I think that makes you a better rounded person and a better rounded player. Yeah, I guess that's me in a nutshell.
I think I would have allowed myself a little bit longer to go through that grieving process, that period of just like sadness, you know, where you're like, again, or you're dealing with all these things. I threw myself into rehab really quickly, probably too quickly. It was a coping mechanism at the time. I'm glad I did it because my knee's in good shape, but just allow yourself time to feel what it is that you want to feel. And then when you've got that out of your system, normally someone else sees it, you can start the process of healing physically, mentally. And then the only other thing, just to echo Garvey, is just try and be rounded. And I mean that like genuinely, just try and have more to than just being a rugby player. And that's coming from someone who, as I've said, it's been the best job I'll ever have, but there's no reason why you can't find something else that you're passionate about. You've got time, you've more than likely got the finance, and allow yourself the space and time within a week to just try and develop yourself.
What about you, Beef? You're hosting it, but you're obviously you've been a player for years yourself. What would be your one?
I think I'd echo the point of have something outside of rugby that you can focus on. That was the biggest help for me. Again, might have been lucky because I knew they were coming, and it's something you can probably handle a lot better when you know that it is going to come. But also just surround yourself with good people. If you've got a support network and you've got a good group that you are close with at the club, go out of your way to be around them. I know it's difficult during the day when you're, like you say, that we use that term ghosting, just ghosting around the place, but stick around a little bit after training, sit there, have a coffee, bring some cards in, play some Monopoly deal during the morning, during the afternoon, and just continue to have that social interaction. For me, I'm quite a social being. It was one of the massive things I struggled with in lockdown. I mean, myself, Niall, and a few of the other lads were having a Zoom once a week, just to chat. I've still got minutes from all those conversations.
Just for a beer.
Yeah, more than anything else. And I think when you're as social as I am, having a group of people around that you can talk to and just be open with and candid, much like you two have been today, and be able to have these conversations without fear of judgment, without fear of anything, is hugely, hugely beneficial and will help keep that top 2 inches in the best place it can be when you're staring down the barrel of, sort of an undefined period of time. But nice. Do you want to, Gav? Do you want to do the sign off as well? You want to take over the hosting?
No, I just want to make sure that
please, you do the sign. Basically, what you're saying is thanks.
No, can I just say one more thing though? Just obviously, as my role as a player development manager now, we're all mental health first aiders. We're all there to chat. I'm actually, I'm very fortunate to work with a great team that are keen to help players anyway, on and off the pitch in any way we can. So if there's any point that any player is struggling, or is there a point that any player wants to help, please come and see us. You've got our numbers, whatever you need, get in touch. Come, we'll take you for a coffee, whatever we need, but we're here to help. So don't be a stranger.
I think that is probably the perfect sentence to end this on. So thank you very much for listening. This is the end of this episode of The Player's Voice. Niall, Annett, Matt, Garvey, lads, thank you so much for your time and just being so open and candid about everything. I know it's not necessarily an easy subject to talk about, but you two have been very, very helpful. And I think if one person listens to this, one player who's going through a rough injury time and can help themselves get through it, we've done our job. And as we say, any players that are listening, your player development manager is available if you ever are going through any tough times mentally. But again, thank you for listening. As always, we want to hear off you. So if you have any topics that you want to hear us speak about or have any questions, just tweet us using the hashtag #ThePlayersVoice. Thank you again. See you next time.